Hi, welcome back to my channel. This is Psychic Medium Raymond Guzman, and today I'm going to be doing a psychic reading on a historical figure known as Elizabeth Bathory, also known as the Countess Vampire Queen. There's a lot of references, a lot of different names about this woman, and in history, she was in Hungarian or Hungary, and that country, and basically there was a lot about her that people believe that she was this cold-blooded serial killer vampire type of lady, kind of like the female version of Dracula, and that she carried out a lot of deaths of young virgins and girls, and drank their blood or bathed in it, and did all kinds of heinous acts. So for those of you that are listening to this video, thank you so much for being here. Please go ahead and hit the red subscribe button on the bottom right hand corner of this video. Also, for those of you that are wondering if I only do YouTube private YouTube readings, psychic readings, or do I do personal readings, I usually state that at the end of the video, but I wanted to make sure that those of you that are tuning in know that I do private readings for real people, not just celebrities, but anyone, you know, who is interested in a reading can go to my website. And if you are interested in a reading, I have a sale right now, 10% off. Just use the promo code FALL. That's FALL, like fall. And happy equinox, happy fall for everyone that's listening. And it's valid up until September the 30th. So that's on any readings that you purchase. Okay, so getting back into Elizabeth Bathory. There's a lot of intrigue. Now, the photos here, some people may say that's not her photo or it's just a depiction, but regardless of that, I'm going to be channeling and giving you the information that I get from her. Okay, now you have to understand the time period that this was in. Back then, there was no YouTube, there was no social media, there was no cell phones, there was no telephones. It was a very different time than now. Most people in a village or in the town, you know, would completely rely on gossip. And that was like the news, you know, they'd go to the market and people were just talking to each other, or neighbors were talking, and it spread like a wildfire, you know, whatever was the gossip around town. And it went from one person told the other person, and that's how a lot of rumors were started, and a lot of legends that were false. They're false legends, but they're have been documented as being historical. And a lot of people, especially women, were victims during this time because men were the ones in power, and men didn't like the fact that there was a strong woman that would have been in power, like Elizabeth. So what I get from her is that she was a kind soul. I don't see her, honestly, this is my honest feedback. I'm not, you know, just spitting out anything just to you know, say it. But what I get when I look and I start channeling her energy, I don't get that she was sadistic and she was this serial killer that they made her out to be. I do feel like she did have a lot of problems. Yes, she was, I do believe, depressed in many ways, and she was oppressed by, you know, her own husband that she was married to. But for those of you that are listening, I'll get into the next slide, but this woman married at the age of 10 years old to a guy who was 16 years old. I mean, that's how different our times were back then, you know, where people married, your parents would marry children basically together. It is a whole different world, very cruel, very, it's like they didn't have a choice in certain things between certain bloodlines. So this woman was a, you know, a baby. She was a child still when she got married to this man that was called Ferenc. I can't pronounce his name right, so but you'll see it in the next slide, and I'll go over him in a minute. But yeah, she was very young when she got married, and I feel like she was exposed to many different situations that she didn't even get to complete her childhood or her teenage years. It was like automatically, you know, going and living with his family in their castle, in their home, you know, and being exposed to all different types of things. It kind of messed up her sense of security and her self-esteem, and also her confidence. But she learned to kind of have a thick skin and deal with it. So what I get is that, you know, she was in a very powerful position after her husband died, and he died, you know, from disease. At least that's what's documented in the history, but that's what I also get from spiritually from his soul as well. But what I see is that, Elizabeth was left to be this ruler, this strong lady with a lot of money and power, and people feared her. And I feel like a lot of these rumors were created by some of her own staff members and people close to her to kind of give her that fear, that so that people would respect her. Because think about it, when there's a rumor that started that someone is, like this very cruel and very, sadistic type of person, even if she's a female, that is revered around, the village and townspeople. So people are going to start thinking about, well, she's a woman, but she's, she's this tough killer. She's the serial killer. She's someone, that we need to fear. And I just get that, that some of those rumors were created by some of the people in her own staff that would have been working around her, that were jealous, but at the same time they wanted to kind of help her have some power over people. And while it worked for many, many years, it slowly turned into something more of a nightmare, and it wasn't what she expected, and what the staff members expected. I actually feel like with King Matthias, he was the one that that went to, interrogate her and accuse her. And it was a perfect thing because he owed Elizabeth money. He owed her a lot of money. I feel like he owed her a lot of money. And so what better way to get rid of someone that you consider an enemy, or to pay off your debt, than to accuse them of being a killer? I do not feel that this woman was a sadistic serial killer. I just don't see it. I don't see that she would have, drank blood or would have bathed in blood. I feel like everything was a plot to tarnish her name and to make her be known throughout history as someone that was a killer. There was never, in this whole process back then, there was no forensics. It was all word of mouth, and there were all men that accused her. And the people that her servants that testified against her, or people that testified against her, they were all people who would have feared the king, who would have feared power. So again, there's all this twisting and conflicting evidence. Like I said, when we go back into the history books and everything that's documented, a lot of this was documented from a male's perspective, a man's perspective. And while, there are good men out there, a lot of these historians and a lot of these males back then were not good people. I'm just going to put it out there. They weren't the best people, and their view and their respect of a female and a woman was very much minimal. Like, they didn't have no respect for a woman. They did not see them as having their own equality and rights. They were like property to the men. So again, I feel like she was a very sweet lady. I get that she had a lot of emotional problems, and she did fear that this would be the outcome of, her being accused of this. All of the evidence that they said they found as far as cadavers and seeing her were all lies. There were bodies that were dug up from, other places and brought to her place, so that they would have this, quote unquote evidence against her. But I don't get that any of that. And all of the servants that would have testified against her, they were either, I feel like they were threatened that if they didn't testify in favor of the king, that she was a bad person, that they would ultimately face death. So there was a lot of lies, manipulation coming from King Matthias. When I get into his soul, I don't have him pictured here, but he's not a good man. He was very crooked. He was a killer, and he did kill a lot of people. I get that he was very greedy and did a lot of shady businesses, and he did abuse women, and he was just that kind of person. So he didn't like Elizabeth, and I feel like he had a thing that he wanted to kind of like have some kind of affair with Elizabeth as well, and she rejected him after, her husband passed. And so he didn't like the fact that he was also rejected by her, because she was protected. She had her bodyguards, and she had people in her, her servants and people that respected her. But there was a lot of lies, and I see that she stood her ground. She had that, she didn't let a man kind of, take over and just lie. She stood her ground, and she would defend herself, and they didn't like that. But she did feel emotionally withdrawn from everything. She did feel like she couldn't, go against all these people when they started, going against her. But all these people were threatened. All the villagers, all the people that were, testified against her, it was all lies. And it accelerated. This thing accelerated and took off very quickly, and it spread like a wildfire through the villages and through the city and the town hall, whatever you call it back then, in that kind of country. But it was something where people, they wanted to, it was almost like in the time period, just like Jesus, they wanted a spectacle. They wanted to see people crucified and killed, and it was almost like a show for them. I don't feel like their consciousness was elevated. They were very primitive in the way that they saw things and did things. So again, she would have been a victim of lies, lies that she was this a vampire queen, that she did all of these things that they have no proof of doing it. And I feel like her life, for the most part, the life, she was 50 years old when she passed. At least that's what is documented in the history books. But I don't feel like she was happy at all. Even with all her power and her success and her money, there was never a time where she was actually happy. Everything was just unhappiness. And and I feel like her union to Ferenc, which I'll get into the next slide in a minute, that was her husband, who she married at 10 years old, I believe. It wasn't a happy union as well. It was a forced union, and that wasn't her soulmate. It wasn't even her twin flame. It was just two families wanting to, put marry and put two bloodlines together, because it served their purpose for society. This was all about putting on a show and making the people think, this is the perfect union, just to keep their their names and their reputations as pristine, and kind of, it was like they were showing off basically, and at the expense of their own children. So it's like these kids were, she was a kid when she was given away to marry this man, forced to marry this man. She didn't have a choice. It's like back then, like the parents, and the way that people thought, it's just beyond me how things were carried out back then. It's disgusting, and it's just it's horrific that all of this that would have gone on. But I do get that when she was accused, and they did put her up in the tower, and they locked her in there in the prison basically. She was malnourished. I feel like they didn't give her food all the time and not enough water. I feel like she would have also been abused. I feel like there's things that they didn't document. She would have been abused, and that's what I get. Beaten. I felt a lot of pressure in my head as well, on the left side when I was connecting to her. And I feel like my throat, like when somebody is strangled almost, that's the kind of feeling that I felt in my throat area when I'm channeling her soul and what is going on, and a lot of pain in the throat area. So I feel like they said that she, the story is that she was complaining, that her hands were cold one evening in 1614, and that, she was feeling very cold. She told her bodyguard out that was standing outside of the prison door, and he said basically that it was nothing. And so the next day she woke up. I don't buy any of that. That's all baloney. I'm sorry. It's baloney. She was murdered. She was murdered because eventually there was going to be something that she was working on, even though she was locked up, where she was going to overtake her power back and control the power. And there was going to be something where she was going to get back into her, because at the time that she died, that they murdered her, I get that there would have been something going on with the King Matthias in that area, where he was like losing his power and people were turning against him around that time. And so they would have looked for Elizabeth Bathory, and they would have known that this was somebody was going to basically out Matthias, is what I'm getting. And they knew that this was all lies. And it would have spread through the village that he lied about Elizabeth in the first place. And if she would have taken power over again and become, the ruler again, basically there would have been a price to pay for King Matthias, and for heresy, for lying. and for just being, someone that's evil and that has killed people, because he actually did. I do get that he would have killed people, and his hands were full of blood, and blood. He had no heart, no compassion. She had compassion, but again, it was just an injustice of what she did. But she was murdered. I feel like she was murdered, and she was strangled, and she was beaten. This was not a natural death that you pass through natural causes in your sleep. No, this was all lies, and it was documented. That's what makes it so bad. Like when we go back into history and we look at all of these things that are documented, how can you believe everything that is written in history? Because a lot of it, honestly, honest to God, a lot of it is not accurate. It's misconstrued. It's given from a viewpoint of males, of who were paid back then, to write these stories, or share these myths with people, and people that weren't even. It was just a big lie. I don't see her as a killer. I don't see her as a sadistic person, or that she would have killed anyone. I feel like she had to be tough. She had to stand her ground. She was very much emotionally kind of withdrawn, and she had a lot of dreams to fulfill things in her life. She wanted to ultimately be happy, and she wasn't happy. Now, let me get to the next slide. This slide is her husband, the guy that she married at 10 years old. And his name was Ferenc. I don't speak Hungarian, so I'm not good with a lot of these names. Nádasdy. Okay, that's my best try for it. But as you can see, there's an illustration of him here. I don't know if this is what he really looked like. I do get that he was a stocky man in real life back then, and he ate very poorly. He would eat good foods, but poor foods, and he just didn't take good care of his health. But I feel like he was very unfaithful to Elizabeth, and he would have had affairs outside of the marriage with other people when he was out doing this war and all this traveling and stuff that he did. I do feel like he knew Elizabeth didn't love him. There was no love in between them. I mean, a 16-year-old and a 10-year-old, come on, there was no love there. And I get that that he was someone that knew that, and so he went looking for love in other places. But ultimately, he had to keep the image. Back then it was forbidden for people that had gotten married to separate. It was just like not heard of, because as soon as they if they were in power, because he was a count, if they were in some kind of power, in a position, a powerful position, and they kind of disbanded, or they would have a divorce, then they would lose that power and that unity, so people wouldn't respect them anymore. But he had a lot of worries as well, and I feel like he wasn't well liked. There was also rumors that he died from sickness, and I do feel like that is the case. Like I said, he didn't take care of himself very well, and I do feel like he made some poor choices all throughout his life. Up until his death. And with him, I just feel like he was just someone who didn't care. He just liked the power. He liked arguments. He liked battle. He liked killing people, and I feel like he actually does have blood on his hands as well. So he was someone that would have executed people as well. But I get a lot of a headache when I'm tuning into him. I don't feel like he passed from his head, but there was something about being sick and dizzy and feverish, and feeling like he was out of it with whatever he had that was a disease or illness. It could have been like syphilis, to be honest. Back then it wasn't uncommon in a lot of these places to get that kind of disease, but he had something definitely going on, and I feel like it was something that was almost like a sexually transmitted disease, to be honest. But a lot of the times they were documented as something else in the history books. But like I said, their hygiene back then was a little different, and especially if he would have had affairs with different people, I don't have to get into that into specific, but yeah, this is just a whole big lie about Elizabeth, and the whole way that everything just went on. It was insane. I do feel like the King Matthias actually did suffer his karmic justice years later when he died. However he died, it was justice that was served, and it was karmic in nature for how he treated Elizabeth, and how he lied about her to kind of overthrow her power and have the ultimate power himself. But yeah, it was back then was a very different time, and I feel like everything was just it would have been a people think it was so simple to live back then that it would have been a nice more simpler. It would have been more nice to live in that kind of thing. But when you not if you were a royalty or someone in power, it wasn't a pleasant place to live in, because you would be judged by the villagers. There would be some jealousy. There would be people who thought you were better than them. So it was a totally different time period. But I really enjoyed doing this reading. Again, this is just my insight and my opinions of what I get from Spirit. You don't have to agree, but if you have any comments, please leave them in the comments section below, as far as anybody that you want me to read. And I hope you're enjoying a lot of these. I'm very happy to read your comments. For those of you that are enjoying these type of readings, like I said, I'm not going to go away from doing celebrity readings, but I'm kind of taking a hiatus away from that and kind of going into the history. And I feel like it's good to go back and revisit historical events and people, because there is some truth that is being shed through these readings that I'm giving, because like I said, a lot of these things that were documented in history are not accurate. They were misconstrued, and there was a lot of lies that have been given just to feed a folklore, a local just to have a local legend and know that there's this legend that's going on in that place. But I hope you did enjoy it. If you did like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Also, be sure to follow me on Facebook and Instagram. And if you would like to set up a private reading, you can go to my website. Again, that's www.raymondguzman.net/shop. Blessings and love and light. Have an amazing day.